In ordinary light, the cup looks green. Not bright green, more like jade. Cool, dense, almost stone-like. Then someone moves the light behind it, and the glass turns red. Not warmer, not slightly different. Red, a Roman cup from the 4th century suddenly behaves like a laboratory demonstration. That is why the Lycurgus Cup is so dangerous to talk about. Because the effect is real, the science is real. The particles inside the glass really are small enough to interact with light in ways that sound modern, but if we tell the story badly, we turn one of the most astonishing craft objects of the ancient world into a cheap headline. Roman nanotechnology. It is a phrase that grabs attention. It is also a phrase that can mislead, because the cup does not prove that Roman glassmakers understood nanoscale physics. It shows something more human, and in some ways more impressive. It shows that ancient craft could produce effects so subtle that modern science needed microscopes to explain them. The British Museum identifies the Lycurgus Cup as a late Roman drinking cup from the 4th century. It is made of glass with silver and silver gilt mounts. The scene around the outside shows the death of King Lycurgus, a mythological figure connected with Dionysus. Even if the glass never changed color, this would still be an extraordinary object. It belongs to a rare family of Roman luxury glass often called cage cups. These were not simple drinking vessels. They were feats of cutting and patience. The basic idea is almost frightening. Start with a thick glass blank, then cut away the outside so carefully that decoration remains standing proud from the vessel, attached by tiny bridges and supports one mistake, and the object is ruined. Too much pressure, ruined. One bad cut, ruined. One crack at the wrong moment, ruined. The Lycurgus Cup is not just colored glass, it is carved glass. It is myth wrapped around a vessel, with figures and vines standing out from the body like a frozen performance. So before we even reach the science, we should sit with the craft. Someone made this slowly. Someone trusted their hands near the edge of disaster. And then, as if that were not enough, the glass itself changed with the light. The color change is the hook because it is immediate. You do not need a degree to feel it. Light from the front, green. Light from behind, red. The technical word is dichroic. It means the material can show 2 different colors depending on how light interacts with it. In reflected light, when light bounces off the cup toward your eyes, the glass appears greenish. In transmitted light, when light passes through the glass, it glows red. Imagine that in a dim, ancient room, not as a museum object. As an experience, oil lamps, wine, silver, shadows, a myth of divine punishment carved around the surface. Then the cup is lifted, turned, or backlit, and the scene changes color. The object does not just show a story, it performs one. That is the part modern explanations sometimes flatten. We explain the effect, and because we explain it, we forget how strange it would have felt to see it before the explanation existed. The science does not remove the wonder. It tells us where the wonder was hiding. Modern analysis connects the Lycurgus Cup's color shift to tiny particles of metals, especially gold and silver, dispersed through the glass. These particles are extremely small, small enough that they interact with visible light differently from larger pieces of metal. A gold coin looks like a gold coin, a silver cup looks like a silver cup, but when tiny metallic particles are suspended inside glass, the rules change. Light can be absorbed, scattered, and transmitted in different ways depending on the size, shape, composition, and distribution of those particles. That is why the cup can appear green in one lighting condition and red in another. This is where the modern word nanoparticle enters the story. And yes, by modern measurement, the particles involved are nanoscale, but that does not mean a Roman craftsperson was thinking in nanometers. They did not need that unit. They did not need electron microscopes. They did not need a modern theory of surface plasmon resonance. What they needed was craft knowledge, heat timing, recipe material, impurities, failure, memory, workshop tradition. That is not less impressive. It is just a different kind of intelligence. The lazy version of this story says the Romans invented nanotechnology. That sentence is powerful because it makes the past feel like it secretly had our future. But it also steals something from the past. It only respects Roman craft by pretending it was modern science. The better version is more careful. The Lycurgus Cup contains nanoscale structures that modern scientists can describe using nanotechnology language. That is true. But the ancient makers probably did not understand the mechanism the way we do. They may have learned through recipe and repetition. They may have discovered the effect accidentally. They may have known that certain mixtures or workshop conditions created a prized glass without knowing the microscopic reason, and that is how much of human technology actually works. People often learn what works before they know why it works. Bread rose before microbiology, steel was made before atomic theory. Concrete hardened before modern chemistry. Glass changed color before nanoparticles had a name. The cup is not amazing because Rome was secretly modern. It is amazing because Rome did not have to be modern to make something that still challenges our imagination. The cup is named after King Lycurgus. In the myth, Lycurgus opposes Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, transformation, and divine disorder. The scene on the cup shows Lycurgus entangled in vines, trapped and destroyed by forces he tried to resist. That subject matters, because the cup itself is about transformation. The material changes appearance. The myth shows a man transformed by divine punishment. The drinking context connects to Dionysus, and the red glow when light passes through the cup feels almost theatrical, like wine, blood, rage, or divine heat waking inside the glass. We cannot prove exactly how ancient viewers experienced it, but we can say the object was not just a technical stunt. It was art, luxury, myth, material science, social display, and performance at once. Modern categories separate those things. Ancient objects often do not. The cup did not have to choose between being beautiful and being clever. It was both. Cage cups themselves were rare luxury objects. The Corning Museum of Glass describes them as among the most beautiful forms of Roman luxury glass. Produced from around the mid-3rd century to the mid-4th century, they were often associated with privileged owners because the skill and labor involved were enormous. The Lycurgus Cup is even more special because it combines that cage cup craftsmanship with dichroic glass. That combination is not ordinary. It is not something every Roman household had on a shelf. This was elite material culture. A cup like this would have communicated wealth before anyone drank from it. It would have communicated taste. Access status may be education because the mythological scene assumes a viewer who understands the story. And then the color shift added another layer. A guest might first admire the carving, then someone changes the light. Now the room reacts. That is not just decoration, that is social theater. The object makes the owner powerful for a moment because the owner controls the reveal. One of the hardest questions is whether the color effect was deliberate. Did Roman glassmakers intentionally create this exact green-to-red transformation, or did the effect emerge from a recipe, contamination, or workshop process that was not fully understood? The safest answer is that we do not know every step of the ancient manufacturing process, but we can be more precise than that. The cup exists, the effect is real, the craft is elite. The object was valuable enough to be finished, mounted, preserved, and eventually collected. So even if the microscopic mechanism was not understood, the visible result was almost certainly recognized. A craftsperson does not need to know why something works to know that it is worth keeping. If a batch of glass produced this strange color behavior, an experienced workshop would notice. If the effect could be repeated even imperfectly, it could become a prized specialty. If it could not be reliably repeated, that might explain why surviving examples are so rare. This is the beautiful uncertainty of the Lycurgus Cup. It sits between accident and mastery. Not random enough to dismiss, not documented enough to overclaim. This is where the story becomes more interesting than the headline, because when we ask whether the Romans knew nanotechnology, we are usually asking the wrong kind of question. A Roman workshop was not a modern laboratory, but it was not chaos either. Glassmakers knew that materials behaved differently under heat. They knew color could be changed by additives. They knew some mixtures failed, some cracked, some clouded, some cleared, and some produced effects worth repeating. Knowledge like that does not always live in written theory. Sometimes it lives in hands, in timing, in the look of a furnace, in the memory of a batch that went wrong, in a master telling an apprentice, not as a formula in a textbook, but as a warning, not too hot, not too long, not that sand, not that metal. Wait for the color. That kind of knowledge is easy for modern viewers to underestimate because it leaves fewer equations behind. But craft knowledge can be incredibly precise. It can be transmitted across generations. It can produce results that theory only explains much later. So the Lycurgus Cup should not be treated as a lucky accident in the lazy sense. Maybe chance was involved. Maybe contamination played a role. Maybe the exact particle behavior was not controlled in the modern way. But the final object was not accidental. The carving was intentional. The myth was intentional. The mounting was intentional. The survival of the visible effect inside a luxury cup means someone recognized that this material deserved an extraordinary object. The cup is not a lab report. It is a finished performance. There is another reason this episode matters. People often swing between two bad versions of ancient history. In one version, ancient people are treated as primitive, lucky, or barely capable until modern science arrives to explain what they accidentally did. In the other version, ancient people are inflated into secret modern engineers with lost knowledge far beyond the evidence. Both versions are lazy. The Lycurgus Cup gives us a better path. We can say the Roman makers were not modern scientists, and we can say they were astonishingly skilled. We can say modern instruments reveal the nanoscale mechanism, and we can say the ancient object is not reduced by that explanation. We can say the makers may not have understood why the color changed, and we can still respect the craft tradition that produced a vessel worth preserving for more than 1,500 years. That balances the entire identity of this channel. Wonder, but disciplined respect, but not fantasy. Skepticism, but not boredom. Because the truth is usually more durable than the viral exaggeration. And here, the truth is already cinematic. A cup changes color when the light moves through it. That is enough. There is one more quiet miracle in the story. The cup survived. Glass does not owe history anything. It breaks, it chips, it gets recycled. Luxury objects are melted down, remounted, stolen, buried, sold, repaired, and misunderstood. The Lycurgus Cup carries traces of that long afterlife. It has metal mounts, it has damage, it has been collected, studied, photographed, analyzed, and turned into an icon of ancient materials science. But every scientific paper begins with the same impossible prerequisite. The object still exists. That may sound obvious. It is not. Most ancient glass vessels did not survive as complete masterpieces. Most ancient workshop experiments vanished completely. Most luxury objects were broken, buried, or recycled beyond recognition. The Lycurgus Cup is not just evidence of what Roman craft could do. It is evidence that one specific object escaped the ordinary violence of time. That should shape the way we look at it. We are not seeing the average Roman cup. We are seeing an outlier, a survivor, a piece of elite craft that made it through enough accidents to become a question modern science could finally ask. The Lycurgus Cup became more than an ancient luxury object because it offers a bridge. For historians, it shows the sophistication of late Roman glasswork. For materials scientists, it shows that nanoscale optical effects can exist in ancient artifacts. For viewers, it gives a visual payoff that is almost impossible to ignore. Green, then red, past, then laboratory. This is why modern researchers and engineers keep returning to it. The cup has inspired discussions of sensors, nanocomposites, and color-changing materials, not because the Roman makers were building modern devices, but because the ancient object demonstrates a physical effect that modern science can still learn from, imitate, and explain. That is the right way to connect past and present. Not the Romans knew everything we know, not modern science is superior, and the ancient maker was lucky. Both are too simple. The better answer is that ancient craft and modern science are different ways of touching the same material world. One made the object, the other explained it. Neither cancels the other. The most important lesson of the Lycurgus Cup is not that the Romans were secretly ahead of us. It is that human skill does not always announce itself in the language of theory. Sometimes it appears as a recipe, sometimes as a workshop habit, sometimes as a luxury object made for a room full of people who would never know the physics, but would absolutely feel the effect. That is why this cup belongs in the same conversation as Roman concrete, ancient pigments, metalworking, glassmaking, and manuscript craft. These are technologies of attention. They came from people watching materials closely, watching what heat did, watching what impurities changed, watching which failures produced beauty, watching which colors appeared only when the light moved. Modern science gives us words for the hidden mechanism. It can measure the particles, model the light, and reproduce similar effects in new materials. But the ancient object reminds us that discovery is not always a straight line from theory to application. Sometimes the object comes first. The explanation comes centuries later, and when that happens, the ancient maker and the modern scientist meet across time. One asks, can this be made? The other asks, how did this work? The cup answers, both. So is the Lycurgus Cup Roman nanotechnology. If by that you mean Roman craftspeople were deliberately manipulating nanoparticles with modern theory, the evidence does not support that. But if you mean a Roman object contains nanoscale metal particles that produce a spectacular optical effect, then yes, modern science can describe it that way. The difference matters because the cup does not need exaggerated claims. It already does something extraordinary. It takes glass, metal, myth, light, and human skill and fuses them into one object. It looks green until the light passes through, then it glows red, and in that moment the past does not feel primitive. It does not feel modern either. It feels like itself. Strange, skilled, expensive, fragile, brilliant. The Lycurgus Cup is not proof that Rome secretly had our science. It is proof that our science is sometimes needed to fully appreciate Rome's craft. If you want the opposite kind of Roman mystery, watch the Roman dodecahedron episode. The Lycurgus Cup is mysterious because we understand the science but not the full making process. The dodecahedron is mysterious because we can see the object clearly and still do not know what it was for.